John had always been a man of solitude, the kind who could find peace in silence with the occasional sound of tools clinking or the hum of an old truck engine. For the past 10 years he had lived alone in a small town nestled in the quiet hills, far away from the noise of city life. His small house was tucked at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by tall trees and sprawling fields. It wasn't much, but it was enough, or so he thought. John's life hadn't always been this way. There was a time when his world was full of laughter, love, and shared dreams. He had a wife, Mary, a woman full of life and energy. Together they had planned for a future of growing old together, watching their children grow up and perhaps even enjoying their retirement years on the porch of their little house. It had seemed so perfect. But life had a way of changing, of throwing the unexpected into the mix. 10 years ago it all came crashing down. Mary was taken from him in a terrible car accident. The night was dark, the roads were slick with rain, and in a split second everything changed. The doctor's words still echoed in his mind, the same words he'd heard 1,000 times but couldn't quite believe. "I'm so sorry." She didn't make it. The world John knew disappeared that night. The bright, warm future he had dreamed of crumbled into nothingness. He couldn't handle the pain. The loss of Mary had taken away his ability to care about anything else. He shut everyone out, friends, family, even the people who tried to comfort him. He didn't want their sympathy. He just wanted the pain to stop. And so he found comfort in the quiet. The work at his small mechanic shop became his only distraction. It was something he could focus on, something that didn't require much thought or emotional energy. It was a routine that kept him going, even though every day felt like the same as the last. But in his solitude, John had also buried the one thing that made him truly human: his need for connection. Over the years he had avoided any sort of relationship, not because he didn't want one, but because the fear of experiencing that same unbearable loss again was too much to bear. And so he kept to himself content, or at least he convinced himself he was. It wasn't that John didn't care. He did. He saw the way his friends and neighbors looked at him with concern. He heard the whispers behind his back, the ones that wondered when he would finally let go of the past and move on. But he couldn't. He wasn't ready. How could he? The love he had lost was irreplaceable. Every morning he followed the same routine. He woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and then went to work. His shop was always busy enough to keep him occupied, but there was never anyone to share it with. No wife to bring him lunch, no children to visit after school, no laughter filling the empty spaces. At the end of the day, he would head home to his small house, have dinner alone, and sit in the silence of the evening. It was a lonely existence, but it was the life John had come to know. It was during one of these evenings that the knock came. It was a simple sound, the kind of knock you'd expect on any other evening. But for John, it was the sound that broke the monotony of his life. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not at this hour. His first thought was that it was probably just a neighbor with some sort of small request, someone asking for a tool, or maybe help fixing a car. But when he opened the door, he found himself face to face with someone he wasn't prepared for. A woman. A young woman. She stood there, her long brown hair falling loosely over her shoulders, wearing a faded jacket and a nervous smile. Her eyes, though, were the thing that caught John off guard. They were bright, full of warmth, and there was something in them, something familiar yet strange, that made John pause for a moment before speaking. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a bit rough, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone outside of work for weeks. The woman shifted on her feet, her gaze lowering for a moment before she looked back up at him. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Sarah. I just moved to town and I was hoping you might have a room available to rent. I don't have much, but I can pay." John blinked, taken aback by the request. Renting a room? He hadn't had anyone in his house for years. The idea of sharing his space with a stranger made him uneasy. But there was something about her, a quiet desperation in her voice, that made him hesitate before closing the door. "Why me?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "There are other places in town." Sarah's face softened and she looked away briefly. I just need a place for a few days," she explained. "I don't know anyone here and I promise I won't be any trouble. I just need somewhere to stay until I get settled." John studied her for a moment. She seemed honest enough. The hesitation in her voice wasn't the kind of hesitation someone would use to deceive. It was the kind of hesitation you hear from someone who's been through something hard. Without really thinking about it, John stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. "All right," he said quietly. "You can stay for a bit." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his quick acceptance, but she didn't question it. She stepped into the small entryway, her boots tapping lightly on the wood floor. John didn't know why he had agreed to this. Maybe it was the fact that she seemed so alone, or maybe it was the way her eyes had searched his for some kind of reassurance. Either way, she was here now, and there was no turning back. As she settled in, John went back to his routine. But something had shifted. There was now another presence in the house, a soft presence, one that seemed to fill the silence in a way that John didn't expect. Sarah didn't say much at first, respecting his need for solitude, but every time their paths crossed in the hallway there was a flicker of something in her eyes, and John, for the first time in years, felt something stir inside him, a faint feeling, something like warmth, like the hope of a connection. Days passed, and Sarah's presence in John's house felt like an unspoken change in the air. At first it was awkward. Sarah kept to herself, quietly making small adjustments to her room, unpacking only what was necessary, and always keeping a respectful distance from John. She didn't intrude into his personal space, but John couldn't help but notice the small, quiet things she did, like the way she smiled when he brought her a cup of coffee or the way her laughter echoed faintly through the house when she spoke to him. It wasn't that Sarah was particularly outgoing or forceful. In fact, she was the opposite. She seemed to sense John's discomfort with conversation, and she never pushed him to talk. Yet somehow her mere presence seemed to fill the void that had existed in John's life for so long. The quiet that had once felt comfortable now seemed a little too still, and Sarah's soft voice was like a breath of fresh air in his otherwise solitary existence. John found himself looking forward to her occasional visits to the kitchen for a snack. The brief exchanges they shared as she asked about his day, or the way she would smile shyly when he offered to help her with something. It was simple, ordinary interaction, but it was enough to make John feel, well, alive again. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with warm hues of orange and pink, John sat outside on the porch, sipping his beer and gazing at the horizon. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd just enjoyed a moment of stillness. The world around him was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful, the kind of peaceful John had always known, but tonight it felt different. There was something missing in the calmness, something he couldn't quite name. He was about to go inside when Sarah appeared at the door. She had changed into a simple blouse and jeans, and her hair was tied loosely back. Her presence was gentle but steady, and John found himself watching her for a moment longer than he intended. Sarah smiled at him as she walked up to the porch, holding a basket of what looked like freshly picked herbs from the garden. "Hey," she greeted him softly. "I thought you might want some fresh herbs for your cooking. I don't know much, but I figured I could start helping with meals." John looked at her, a little surprised by the offer. "I didn't expect you to do that," she shrugged, a slight blush rising to her cheeks. "I figured it was the least I could do. I appreciate you letting me stay." John smiled, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't the type of warmth he'd felt in a long time. The kind that reminded him of the simple joys of life, like helping someone or offering kindness to another person. "Well, thank you," John said, taking the basket from her. "I'll put these to good use." They stood there for a moment, the evening air cooling around them. For the first time there was no rush to say anything. It felt like a quiet moment of understanding between the two of them. Sarah didn't press him for conversation, and John didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Instead, they just stood together, sharing the stillness. It wasn't until later that evening that things began to shift in a way John wasn't prepared for. They sat at the small kitchen table eating the meal Sarah had helped prepare. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple pasta dish, but the meal felt different. It was more than just food. It was a sign of their growing connection, of Sarah slowly becoming a part of John's life, even if neither of them had fully acknowledged it yet. As they ate, Sarah opened up about her past in a way she hadn't before. She spoke in quiet tones, not rushing to reveal everything, but enough for John to get a glimpse of the struggles she had faced. Her voice was soft, and her words carried a weight that John could feel, even if she didn't say everything aloud. She talked about the hardships of her life before moving to the small town, how she had grown up in a rough neighborhood, the losses she had faced, and the pain of leaving behind everything she had known. "I'm not proud of everything I've done," Sarah confessed, looking down at her plate. "But I've tried to leave the past behind. I didn't expect to end up here, but I think it's where I need to be right now." John listened quietly, not interrupting. He had always been a good listener, even when the world around him felt like it was falling apart. There was something comforting about the way Sarah spoke, without pretending, without hiding. She wasn't asking for sympathy, just for understanding. "You don't have to explain everything to me," John said after a long pause, his voice gentle. "But if you ever feel like talking, I'm here." Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time since she arrived, she seemed to relax, as if she had been holding her breath. "Thank you, John," she whispered, the words carrying more meaning than she realized. That was the moment when John realized that he hadn't been truly alone in years. It wasn't just about the silence that filled his home. It was the absence of any kind of emotional connection. Sarah's presence, her vulnerability, her kindness, everything about her felt like a door opening in his heart, a door he had long since sealed shut. The days that followed brought subtle changes. John found himself looking forward to the times Sarah would share small pieces of her day with him. What she had learned about the town, the new people she'd met, and even her little moments of discovery in the kitchen. Every day she seemed to fit a little more into his world, and he began to realize how much he had been missing. It wasn't just the physical space she took up in his home. It was the emotional space she began to fill. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, wondering how her day had been or whether she was doing okay. He never used to wonder about anything. His life had been static, a dull routine that revolved around work and solitude. But now, with Sarah there, everything felt more alive. One evening, as they sat on the porch together after dinner, the conversation turned to more personal matters. Sarah's words were softer now, not weighed down by hesitation, but rather with a quiet honesty that John found comforting. "You've been so kind to me, John," Sarah said, looking out at the horizon. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't come here." John met her gaze, his eyes softening. "You don't need to thank me. It's not a problem," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm glad you're here." And in that moment, for the first time in years, John felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just the beginning of a friendship. It was something more. Something he wasn't ready to define, but something that was undeniable. He had spent so long avoiding connection, avoiding feeling anything for fear of losing it. But now, with Sarah in his life, he was starting to understand that sometimes the risk of connection was worth the reward. As the night grew darker, John and Sarah stayed outside, wrapped in the quiet of the evening, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time in years, John didn't feel alone, and it was a feeling that for all the pain he'd gone through was worth everything. Days turned into weeks, and John's life had begun to change in ways he hadn't expected. Sarah's presence had filled a void he hadn't realized was so deep. In the beginning, it had been uncomfortable, this new dynamic between them. But now it felt natural. Her laughter, even in its softness, had become a comforting sound in the house. Their conversations, once brief and awkward, had turned into moments of genuine connection. It wasn't just that Sarah was there. It was the way she made him feel, alive in a way that he had forgotten was possible. The weight of his past still lingered in the corners of his mind, but it no longer seemed as heavy with Sarah around. She had a way of lightening the atmosphere, of making him forget, even for a little while, the grief that had held him captive for so many years. One morning, John found himself waking up earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow through the curtains of his bedroom. He lay there for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house, and then, without thinking too much about it, he got up. He hadn't planned to, but somehow he felt the urge to make Sarah breakfast. As he made his way downstairs, he couldn't help but notice the subtle changes that had taken place in the house. It wasn't just the small things Sarah had brought into the kitchen, like the vase of fresh flowers or the hand-painted dish she had placed on the counter. It was the way the place felt more like a home now. Her presence had given it life, made it feel less empty. And John found himself, for the first time in a long time, looking forward to something other than his routine. He cracked eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the kitchen, and before long, the smell of breakfast wafted through the house. He set the table carefully as if he were preparing for something special. He knew it wasn't a grand gesture, but there was something about it that felt significant. It felt like a step towards something new, something he had long abandoned. When Sarah finally appeared, rubbing her eyes and yawning, John smiled at her. "Good morning," he said, his voice warmer than it had been in years. "Good morning," she replied, smiling sleepily. "This smells amazing." John felt a sense of satisfaction at her words. "I figured I'd try something different today. I hope you're hungry." They sat down together and the conversation began, not with anything important but with the kind of small talk that felt so rare in John's life. Sarah asked about his plans for the day and he asked her about hers. There were no heavy discussions about the past or deep unresolved feelings, just simple, pleasant exchanges. But then, in the middle of their meal, Sarah's voice shifted slightly. She seemed a little hesitant, as though she were testing the waters. "John," she began slowly, "I've been thinking about something lately." John raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" She paused for a moment, looking down at her plate. "I've been here for a while now, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. You've helped me in ways I didn't expect, but I don't want to stay forever. I don't want to be a burden." John frowned, not sure how to respond. "You're not a burden, Sarah. You've been a good friend to me." I know," she interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "But I don't want to overstay my welcome. I've been thinking it might be time for me to move on, to find my own place. I'm not sure what comes next." John felt a tightness in his chest at her words. The thought of Sarah leaving unsettled him more than he expected. He didn't want to lose the connection they had built. It had taken him so long to get to this point, to allow someone into his life again, and the thought of her leaving felt like a step backward. "I understand," John said quietly, though he didn't feel quite so understanding inside. "But where will you go?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know yet. I just feel like it's time for me to figure things out on my own. I don't want to be running from my past anymore." John nodded slowly, though he didn't quite know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her that she didn't have to go, that she could stay as long as she needed. But the other part of him knew that she had her own journey to follow, one that didn't have to include him. The rest of the meal was quiet, and John couldn't help but feel the weight of her words settle in his chest. It was clear that Sarah was at a crossroads, just as he had been not so long ago. But he also knew that part of healing, part of moving on, was finding the courage to face the future on your own terms. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Sarah kept to herself more than usual, and John noticed the quiet in the air between them. It wasn't the kind of silence that made him feel lonely. It was the kind of silence that came with unspoken understanding. They both knew something was changing, and neither of them knew how to navigate it. It was during one of their nightly walks that the shift between them became more apparent. They had fallen into the habit of walking together after dinner, and tonight was no different. The sky was clear, the stars bright overhead, and the cool air felt refreshing against John's skin. Sarah walked beside him, but there was a distance between them, a space that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence, "about what I said earlier. I don't want to go yet." John glanced at her, surprised. "What changed?" I think I was just scared," she admitted. "I've been running from things for so long, but maybe I need to stay here a little longer. Maybe I need to figure out where I belong before I leave." John felt a wave of relief wash over him, though he didn't show it. "You don't have to leave if you don't want to." "I'm glad you're here, Sarah." For the first time in what felt like ages, he didn't feel the weight of his past pressing down on him. He was ready to face whatever came next, not alone, but with Sarah beside him. They continued their walk in silence, but this time it was different. There was a quiet peace between them, a feeling that they both understood what was happening. Sarah wasn't ready to leave, and neither was John ready to let her go. As the days stretched on, the unease that had briefly settled between John and Sarah began to fade. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect. It wasn't. But they had started to find a rhythm, a way of being around each other without the awkwardness that had defined their early days together. Sarah had decided to stay longer, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she needed more time to heal, time to figure things out. and for John time to face the possibility of something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in for a long time, a chance at a future that wasn't filled with solitude. One evening, after a long day of work, John found himself waiting for Sarah to return from town. It had become routine. She would go into town once a week to pick up some essentials or just to take a walk around the small shops. It gave her a sense of normalcy, a brief escape from the silence of the house, and John had started to look forward to these little breaks. He was sitting on the porch, as he often did in the evenings, his mind wandering through the familiar thoughts of his past. The sound of Sarah's laughter echoed faintly in his memory, the way she had smiled when she helped him fix a broken chair, or when she'd given him that shy but genuine compliment on his cooking. It was these little moments that had slowly but surely begun to heal the wound in his heart. When Sarah returned that evening, she was different. She had always been warm and kind, but tonight there was something else in her eyes, something John couldn't quite place. As she approached the porch, he stood up, a sense of curiosity and concern filling him. "Hey, you're back early," he said, his voice a bit more careful than usual. Sarah smiled, but it was a distant smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, I've been thinking about something," she said, walking slowly toward him. John's heart skipped a beat. He had seen her this way before, when she was lost in thought, when she was on the verge of making a decision she wasn't sure about. His instincts told him that something was coming, something important. "What's on your mind?" John asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, though he felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "I've been here for a while now," she began, her voice soft but steady. "And I'm starting to realize something. I've been running from my past for so long, but I can't keep doing that. I need to face it. I need to figure out what's next." John nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. He had suspected this moment would come. Sarah had been so closed off about her past, and he had never pushed her. He understood, at least on some level, what it meant to keep painful memories locked away. But he didn't expect her to leave, not yet. Not when everything between them was finally beginning to feel right. "I think I'm ready to leave," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I want to run away again, but because I need to find myself. I need to heal. And I can't do that if I'm just staying here with you, comfortable but stuck." The words hit John like a wave. He hadn't prepared himself for this moment, even though he had known deep down that it was inevitable. The thought of Sarah leaving was harder to bear than he had imagined. She had become more than just a guest in his home. She had become a part of his life, a part of his days. The idea of her walking away, of losing that connection, was more painful than he cared to admit. "Sarah," he said quietly, taking a step toward her. "You don't have to leave. You don't have to do this alone." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I know you don't want me to go, John. And I don't want to hurt you, but I think I need to do this for myself. I need to find my own way forward. I've been stuck in this limbo, this place where I'm not really living, just existing. And I can't keep doing that." John felt a pang in his chest, a mixture of fear and understanding. He didn't want to lose her, but he also knew that forcing her to stay wasn't the answer. She was right. She needed to find her own path, just as he had needed to find his. He had spent so many years burying his pain, avoiding the things that scared him. But Sarah had shown him what it was like to embrace life again, to feel the possibility of something more. "I get it," John said, his voice rough. "I don't want you to feel like you have to stay because of me. But just promise me you'll come back if you need to. I'm here for you, Sarah. Whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I don't know what to say. I don't want to leave you, but I have to. I have to do this for me." John took a deep breath, his heart heavy but understanding. "Then go and find what you need. But don't forget that I'm here, and when you're ready, you know where to find me." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them thick with emotion. John could feel the weight of the decision settling between them, and though it hurt, he knew it was the right thing for Sarah. She wasn't running away from him. She was running toward herself, toward her own healing, and in the end, that was all he could hope for her. "I'll be back," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I promise," John smiled, though it was a sad smile. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." With that, she turned and walked down the porch steps, her footsteps slow but determined. John watched her go, the ache in his chest growing with every step she took. He wanted to reach out to call her back, but he knew he couldn't. This was her journey, not his. And if he truly cared about her, he would let her go. As Sarah disappeared into the distance, John stayed on the porch, the cool night air surrounding him. The stars above seemed to flicker softly, as if offering him some kind of quiet comfort. He wasn't sure what the future held for either of them, but he knew one thing for certain. He had allowed someone into his life again, and that had changed him in ways he couldn't fully understand yet. And no matter where Sarah went, that would always be a part of him. Months passed after Sarah left, and life returned to its quiet routine. John had learned to adjust, though it was harder than he had expected. The house was empty again. It wasn't that he missed the noise or the clutter of her things, but it was the silence, the kind of silence that wrapped around him, heavy and thick in the places Sarah had once filled with warmth. The house felt cold, almost as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to change. John threw himself into his work as he always had, but it wasn't the same anymore. The long hours spent in the mechanic shop were no longer a distraction. They were just a way to pass time. There was no longer anyone to ask about his day, no one to share a quiet meal with or talk to in the evenings. And though he had convinced himself that he was okay, that he had done the right thing by letting Sarah go, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had gotten so used to her presence, her laughter, her small acts of kindness, and now that she was gone, the emptiness felt larger, more unbearable. Every so often he would think about her. He'd wonder how she was doing, if she had found the peace she had been searching for. He never heard from her, and at first that made sense. She had needed space, time to herself, and John understood that. But as weeks turned into months, the absence of any communication made him uneasy. Had she found what she needed? Was she okay? Did she even remember the promise she had made to come back? One crisp autumn morning, John found himself standing outside, looking up at the sky as the first light of day broke through the trees. The chill in the air was fresh, and the sound of fallen leaves rustling underfoot seemed to remind him of the passage of time. He had gotten used to the quiet, but it was still a hard thing to accept. And yet, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so completely lost in it. He was just about to head back inside when he saw something, a figure in the distance, walking down the long gravel road toward the house. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he thought it was his imagination playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. It was Sarah. He stood frozen for a moment, not sure what to do. She was walking toward him, her pace steady but slow. Her eyes were fixed ahead, and she didn't seem to notice him at first. She was dressed simply, like she had been on a journey, and yet there was something in her demeanor that was different. It was a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that John hadn't seen the last time she had been here. She had changed in ways that he couldn't quite put into words, but it was clear that she was no longer the woman who had walked away so many months ago. As Sarah came closer, John's heart began to race, his chest tightening with a mix of emotions he hadn't anticipated. He didn't know what to say, or even if he should say anything at all. The time apart had created a distance between them, but at the same time it had made him realize how much he had missed her, how much her presence had meant in his life. "Sarah?" he called, his voice hesitant at first, unsure if he should interrupt the quiet moment. She looked up, her face softening with recognition. A smile appeared on her lips, though it was tentative, as if she weren't sure how to react herself. "John," she said, her voice carrying a sense of relief. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." "I've been here," John replied, his voice steady now, though his heart was racing. "Waiting, I guess." Sarah stopped a few steps away from him, and they both stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comfortable, as though they both understood that this moment, this reunion, had been a long time coming. "I've missed you," Sarah finally said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. John nodded, his own emotions catching in his throat. "I've missed you too, Sarah. More than I thought I would." She took a step closer, and for a moment John could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the weight of the journey she had been on. She wasn't the same person who had left so many months ago, but then again, neither was he. He had changed too, and maybe that was what had brought them back together. Not the hope of picking up where they had left off, but the understanding that they both needed something more. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Sarah continued, her eyes dropping to the ground for a moment before meeting his gaze again. I left because I needed to figure things out on my own. And I did. But what I realized was that I don't want to do this alone anymore. I don't want to keep running from everything that happened. I want to face it. And I want to do it with you if you'll have me. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment John didn't speak. He just let them settle into the quiet of the morning. What Sarah had said wasn't a simple declaration. It was a promise. A promise that she was ready to face her past, to move forward, and that she wanted him to be part of that future. And in that moment, John realized that he didn't just want her to stay. He needed her to stay, not because he couldn't live without her, but because he had learned to love her in ways he hadn't expected. I never wanted you to leave, John said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I understood why you did, but I never wanted you to go. And I don't want you to leave again, Sarah. I want to help you face whatever it is you need to face. Together. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by the emotion. But John saw it. He saw the vulnerability, the relief, and the hope that flickered in her eyes. This wasn't just a moment of coming back. It was a moment of starting over, of beginning something new, something both of them had needed but hadn't known how to ask for. Without another word, Sarah stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her arms wrapped around him, and John hesitated for a brief moment before pulling her close. The warmth of her embrace filled him with a sense of peace, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in so long. This was different from before. It wasn't about avoiding pain or running from the past. It was about moving forward, facing what came next, and doing it together. I'm here, John, Sarah whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. I'm not going anywhere. John held her tightly, the weight of everything that had passed between them, everything they had both been through, falling away in that moment. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future would bring. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it. With Sarah beside him, whatever came next felt like something they could face together.